Houston was already sweltering by 9 a.m., the kind of heat that made the air itself shimmer. The hum of jackhammers, the echo of hammers against rebar, and the rhythmic whir of a cement mixer filled the half-built skyline. To most, it was just another construction site, but to Eleanor Hayes, it was an empire in progress. Her black SUV rolled to a stop on the edge of the dusty lot. The driver barely had time to open the door before she stepped out, heels clicking against the concrete, her tailored navy suit a sharp contrast to the orange vests and steel-toe boots surrounding her. Conversations stopped. Helmets turned. Everyone knew who she was. "Morning, Miss Hayes," stammered one of the supervisors, rushing toward her with a clipboard. "Didn't expect you out here today." "That's the point," Eleanor said flatly, scanning the site. "If I showed up when you expected me, you'd hide all the problems." She adjusted her sunglasses and started walking. The workers cleared a path instinctively, not out of fear, but respect mixed with unease. Eleanor Hayes wasn't cruel. She was efficient. Legendary in Houston's real estate world, she'd built half the city's skyline and buried more than one competitor along the way. People whispered that she had ice in her veins. The truth was colder. She had walls. It had been 8 years since her husband's sudden heart attack, and she hadn't cried once. Grief had become fuel, and fuel had made her rich. But success didn't warm empty penthouses. As she moved through the site, she noticed every detail: uneven bricks, a misplaced beam, a corner cut too sharply. She never missed anything. That's why her projects were perfect. That's also why her employees were terrified of her inspections. "Who's leading this section?" she asked, pointing toward a scaffolding zone. A voice came from behind her. "That'd be me, ma'am." Tom Grady. She turned to face him, a tall man in his 40s, sunburned, confident, the kind of supervisor who barked instead of spoke. He wore a reflective vest over a wrinkled shirt, sleeves rolled high to show forearms lined with dust. His smirk tried to convey authority, but it carried a hint of arrogance. "Good. Walk me through the progress," she said. As Tom led her across the uneven ground, the sound of grunts drew her attention. A group of workers were unloading cement bags from a truck. Among them was a woman, smaller than the rest, hair tucked under a helmet, face streaked with sweat. She bent her knees, lifted a bag that looked almost heavier than she was, and balanced it across her shoulders. Tom noticed Eleanor watching. "That's Lena," he said casually. "One of the Tong. She came in last month. Hard worker, but slow." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Slow? She's lifting 2 bags while the others stand around." Tom forced a laugh. "Yeah, well, she's you know, one of those refugee hires. HR said we had to take a few." Eleanor's gaze snapped toward him. "One of those?" He quickly looked away. "Didn't mean anything by it, ma'am. Just saying she ain't exactly trained for this." Eleanor didn't respond. But she kept watching the woman, Lena. Something about her movements was deliberate, disciplined. She wasn't clumsy or weak. She was steady, determined, the kind of strength that came from surviving something harder than physical labor. Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, a text from her assistant. "Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. Don't forget to eat." She turned the screen off without replying. Then, as she looked back toward the truck, she saw Tom walking toward Lena. At first, it seemed like routine supervision, but the tone shifted. Sharp, loud, cutting through the air. "I told you to stack those by the west side, not here." Tom barked. Lena froze mid-step, the heavy bag still on her shoulder. I thought the foreman said, "Don't think," he snapped. "Just do your job right for once." Eleanor felt her jaw tighten. She watched as the man waved his hands, his voice rising while others pretended not to hear. Lena apologized softly, trying to shift the bag's weight, but he kept going. "Do you even understand directions? Or is English still too much for you?" The words hit the air like a slap. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the humiliation on Lena's face. The other workers looked away, pretending to focus on their tasks, afraid to intervene. Eleanor's heels ground into the dust. She started walking toward them. Grady," she called out, her voice slicing through the noise. The site went silent. Tom turned, startled. "Miss Hayes, I was just—" She stopped a few feet away, her eyes like steel. "You were just what? Correcting her." You were demeaning her," Eleanor interrupted. "Loudly, publicly, and for following someone else's instructions," Tom stammered. I didn't mean—" "Save it," she said coldly. "You're done here." His eyes widened. "You can't just—" She stepped closer. "I can, and I just did. Hand in your ID and get off my site." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. A few workers exchanged shocked looks. Lena stood frozen, the cement bag still on her shoulder until Eleanor gently gestured for her to set it down. "Are you okay?" Eleanor asked softly. Lena nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm fine." But she wasn't. Eleanor could see her hands trembling slightly, not from the weight, but from the embarrassment. Tom muttered under his breath as he handed his badge to a guard. "All this over a damn refugee." Eleanor's tone turned razor sharp. Grady, that woman you just insulted works harder than you have in your entire life. Get out." He stormed off, the sound of his boots fading behind the hum of machinery slowly restarting. Eleanor stood still for a moment, the dust swirling around her heels. Something inside her shifted, a flicker she couldn't quite name. The power she'd just exercised felt hollow. She had defended a stranger, but it didn't feel finished. There was something about that woman, something that demanded more than authority. It demanded understanding. She looked back at Lena, who was now kneeling by the supplies, quietly praying, hands clasped, lips moving without sound. Eleanor frowned, curious. "Is she praying?" The foreman nodded. "She does that sometimes. Says it helps her stay calm." Eleanor watched in silence, the noise of the site fading behind the quiet rhythm of Lena's whispered faith. For the first time in years, something stirred in Eleanor Hayes, not anger, not pride, but a strange, unfamiliar warmth. Something was beginning. The air on the construction site felt different after Tom stormed off, thinner, heavier, like everyone was afraid to breathe too loudly. The workers exchanged uncertain looks, whispering in Spanish, Tagalog, and Arabic, wondering what would happen next. Eleanor turned slowly, scanning their faces. "Everyone, back to work," she said. Her tone was calm, but her expression warned against questions. Within seconds, the sound of labor resumed, hammers, drills, footsteps, all slightly out of rhythm, like the pulse of a room still recovering from a shock. But one person hadn't moved. Lena was still standing near the truck, head bowed, her hands clasped in front of her as if holding invisible weight. Her lips moved silently, her eyes closed. Eleanor hesitated, something tugging at her chest. For most of her life, she'd seen emotion as weakness. Yet right now, she couldn't look away from this woman who refused to retaliate, who stood there in stillness while the world spun around her. She took a few steps closer. "Lena, is it?" Lena opened her eyes, startled. "Yes, ma'am." I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Trouble?" Eleanor repeated. "You were insulted and humiliated in front of 50 people. Lena smiled faintly. "I've been through worse, ma'am." He was angry. "I don't hold it against him." That answer caught Eleanor off guard. "You don't hold it against him?" She repeated, incredulous. "He called you." She stopped herself before repeating the word. "You're seriously telling me you're okay with that?" Lena nodded. "I'm not okay with what he said, but I can't let it live inside me. I forgive him." Eleanor blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "Forgive him? Just like that?" "Yes, ma'am." Lena's voice was steady, almost gentle. "When people hurt you, they're usually hurting inside too. I used to get angry at everyone, until I realized it only made the pain worse. So I pray for them now. Eleanor crossed her arms. You pray for the people who humiliate you? I pray for everyone, Lena said softly. Even for the ones who don't think I belong here. There was no resentment in her tone, no bitterness. Only quiet conviction. And for some reason, that disarmed Eleanor more than any argument could have. Before Eleanor could respond, Lena glanced toward the gate. Tom was still there, arguing with the security guard about his final check. Without hesitation, Lena walked over. Eleanor almost called out to stop her, but something in her gut told her to wait. Lena approached the man who'd screamed at her minutes ago. Her steps were slow, deliberate. The other workers paused again, watching, unable to believe what they were seeing. Tom turned around, red-faced. What, you here to gloat? He spat. Lena shook her head. No, sir. I wanted to say I forgive you. He frowned, thrown off. Forgive me? For what, doing my job? Lena met his eyes calmly. For the words. For the anger. For forgetting we're all just trying to get through the day. Tom stared at her, then laughed, a short, bitter sound. Lady, you're crazy. Maybe, she said quietly. But I'll still pray for you. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Something in her tone, honest, unshakable, made the laughter die in his throat. He stood there frozen, unsure what to say. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. She had expected confrontation, anger, maybe even tears. But this? Forgiveness? That was power of another kind, one she didn't understand. Tom muttered something and walked away, but the moment clung to the air long after he was gone. Eleanor approached again, her voice lower now. Why would you do that? Lena turned toward her, eyes bright but calm. Because I've seen what hate does, man. It burns everything around it. But forgiveness. She paused, searching for the right word. Forgiveness rebuilds. Eleanor didn't reply. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have anything to say. She watched Lena walk back to her work, lifting another cement bag, humming softly under her breath. The rhythm of her movements was slow, almost like a heartbeat, one Eleanor hadn't felt in herself for years. Later that night, sitting in her penthouse office overlooking the glowing city, Eleanor couldn't focus on anything. Not her contracts. Not the skyline. Not even the silence that usually comforted her. All she saw was that woman, dirt on her gloves, tears on her cheeks, whispering a prayer over the man who'd insulted her. Forgiveness rebuilds. The words looped in her head like a haunting melody. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, staring at her reflection in the window, her perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect armor. For the first time, she wondered if her own empire had been built on anger instead of peace. Then, quietly, she whispered into the empty room, Who are you, Lena? The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the site earlier than usual, before the heat, before the noise, before anyone knew she was coming. She told herself she was just following up on safety standards. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. She wanted to see her again. From her SUV, she spotted Lena across the lot, stacking supplies alone. The sky was still pale gray, the air cool and heavy with the smell of dust and concrete. Lena worked with quiet rhythm, humming softly as she moved. She didn't notice Eleanor watching. Something about her presence unsettled Eleanor, not in a bad way, but in a way that made her chest ache. It had been years since anyone's behavior moved her like this. She finally stepped out of the car. Morning, Eleanor called. Lena turned, startled, then smiled shyly. Good morning, Miss Hayes. You're here early. I like to see who actually shows up on time, Eleanor said, but her tone was gentler than usual. Lena chuckled softly. Then you'll see most of us refugees here before sunrise. Eleanor raised a brow. You make it sound like a rule. It's not, Lena said, wiping her hands on her gloves. It's gratitude. We've had enough days when there was nowhere to go. The simplicity of the statement cut through Eleanor's polished composure. She wanted to ask more, but didn't know how. People didn't usually talk to her like that. Instead, she said, "I wanted to apologize for what happened yesterday." Lena shook her head immediately. "You don't have to. You did more than anyone else would have. I did what was right," Eleanor replied. Lena's eyes softened. "Right and kind aren't always the same, ma'am." Eleanor didn't respond. She wasn't used to being corrected, especially not by someone covered in dust and sweat. But somehow she didn't mind. A few hours later, back in her downtown office, Eleanor couldn't focus on her spreadsheets. Her thoughts kept drifting back to that conversation, that sentence. Right and kind aren't always the same. Finally, she called her assistant, Jordan. "I need a background check," she said. Jordan, used to her tone, didn't ask why. Name? Lena. No last name on her badge. Works as a temp at Site 14, Refugee Placement Program. "Got it," Jordan said. "Anything specific you want?" "Everything," Eleanor replied. Where she's from, how she got here, everything. By evening, a file landed in her inbox. She clicked it open, scanning through the report. Lena Haddad. Age, 27. Place of birth, Aleppo, Syria. Status, refugee. Resettled through the United Nations Refugee Program. Family, none located. Parents and siblings presumed deceased after airstrike, 2015. Education, partial engineering degree, incomplete due to displacement. Employment, manual labor, part-time translator for church community programs. At the bottom of the report was a note. Lena volunteers weekly at Harvest Hope Center, a small community outreach ministry that helps refugees find housing and jobs. No criminal or disciplinary records. Known for consistent volunteer work and positive leadership among peers. Eleanor leaned back slowly, reading that line again. Helps refugees find housing and jobs. So she wasn't just surviving, she was helping others survive. She stared out the window for a long time, watching the city's skyline flicker in the evening light. Her towers, steel, glass wealth, looked powerful from a distance. But now, she wondered how many people like Lena had built them brick by brick, without anyone ever knowing their names. Later that week, Eleanor visited Site 14 again, this time without warning. But she didn't go straight to Lena. She observed from afar, watching how the workers interacted with her. What she saw surprised her. Whenever someone dropped tools or tripped, Lena was the first to help. She shared her water bottle with those who forgot theirs. She translated instructions for new hires who didn't speak much English. And every time someone got frustrated or angry, she diffused it with a calm word or a prayer. It wasn't loud, dramatic faith. It was quiet, practical, unshakable. When Eleanor finally approached, Lena was sweeping dust into a pile. "Do you ever stop working?" Eleanor asked. Lena laughed softly. "If I stop, I start thinking too much. What do you think about?" "Home," she said simply. "And the people who didn't make it out." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "You lost family?" Lena nodded. "Everyone. My mother, father, brothers. I was 20 when the airstrike hit our neighborhood. I only survived because I was at the market." The words were said with such calm that it took a moment for their weight to sink in. Eleanor whispered, "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Lena said gently. "It was awful, but it also led me here. And here, I can help others start again." Eleanor was silent. There was something sacred about the way Lena spoke, not dramatic, not self-pitying, just real. After a long pause, Eleanor asked, "Do you believe everything happens for a reason?" Lena smiled faintly. "I believe pain can have purpose, if we let it." That night, Eleanor drove home in silence. The city lights blurred in her windshield. She thought of her late husband, how she'd buried herself in work to avoid grief. She thought of Lena, who had lost far more, yet somehow carried peace instead of bitterness. When she reached her apartment, she didn't go to her desk or pour her usual glass of wine. Instead, she stood at her window, watching the city below, whispering words she hadn't said in years. God, if you're still there, teach me what she has. The following week, Eleanor Hayes did something her staff wasn't used to seeing. She took a detour from her boardroom schedule. Instead of heading straight to her usual meetings downtown, her SUV rolled toward the dusty outskirts of the city, where cranes towered over unfinished steel skeletons, and the air smelled of wet cement and iron. Are we going to Site 14 again? Her driver asked carefully. Yes, Eleanor said, glancing out the window. But don't wait. I'll find my own way back. She didn't say it aloud, but she wasn't there to inspect anything. She was there because something in her had shifted, something restless, almost hungry, for meaning, for peace, for something she'd lost long ago. When she arrived, the morning was in full swing. Workers were shouting instructions, forklifts beeped in reverse, and dust swirled in golden sunlight. Amid it all, Lena was kneeling near a foundation line, smoothing concrete edges with perfect focus. Eleanor approached slowly. You're not supposed to do that without gloves, she said. Lena looked up, smiling faintly. The gloves slow me down. My hands are tougher than they look. Eleanor smiled back before realizing it. That was new. You could get hurt. I have scars already, Lena said simply. A few more won't change who I am. That line lingered. A few more won't change who I am. For Eleanor, those words hit like an arrow. She'd spent years hiding her own scars behind tailored suits and million-dollar deals, pretending they weren't there. Eleanor crouched slightly, the dust marking her polished heels. Tell me something, she said. Why do you still do this work? You're clearly capable of more. Lena shrugged softly. It's honest. I see the walls go up, the rooms take shape. I build something I can touch. That's enough. Eleanor looked at the steel beams above. For someone like me, it's never enough. Lena tilted her head. Maybe that's the problem. Eleanor laughed quietly, not mockingly, but in surprise. You're not afraid to tell me the truth, are you? Lena smiled. Truth doesn't scare people. Losing it does. For a long moment, they just stood there, a billionaire and a refugee, sharing silence in the heat and dust. Then, almost without realizing it, Eleanor said, Have lunch with me. Lena blinked, startled. Lunch? Yes, tomorrow, my office, noon. Lena hesitated. I don't think I'm supposed to. I own the company, Eleanor interrupted gently. You're supposed to. The next day, when Lena arrived at Hayes Development's headquarters, her worn shoes echoed awkwardly across the marble lobby. Everything gleamed, the floors, the walls, even the people. She felt completely out of place, clutching a second-hand handbag like armor. The receptionist looked puzzled until Eleanor herself appeared, waving Lena in warmly. You made it. Eleanor's office was as grand as expected, skyline view, glass desk, paintings that probably cost more than an entire house. But the mood was surprisingly human. There were 2 plates of salad, a pot of tea, and Eleanor. No bodyguards, no assistants. You didn't have to do all this, Lena said shyly. I didn't, Eleanor replied. But I wanted to. They ate quietly for a few minutes before Eleanor broke the silence. I read your file. I hope that doesn't bother you. Lena looked up. A little, she admitted, then smiled softly. But I guess that's what powerful people do when they're curious. Eleanor chuckled. Fair enough. I wanted to understand you. Most people in your situation. They break. You didn't. Lena stirred her tea. I did break, Ms. Hayes. Just not in ways people could see. Eleanor studied her face. Then how did you heal? Faith, Lena said simply. And people who believed in me when I didn't. Eleanor leaned back, her voice quieter now. I used to believe. A long time ago. What changed? Life, Eleanor said. Loss. You reach a point where praying feels like shouting into the dark. Lena nodded slowly. I've been there too. But sometimes. The dark is just waiting for you to light a candle. Those words settled in the air like a whisper from somewhere higher. For the next hour, the conversation drifted, from faith to fear, from war zones to boardrooms, from loneliness to purpose. Eleanor realized she hadn't spoken this openly with anyone in years. Lena's calmness wasn't weakness. It was strength wrapped in gentleness. When lunch ended, Lena stood. "Thank you for the meal." Eleanor hesitated, then asked, "What's your dream, Lena?" "If you could do anything, anything at all, what would it be?" Lena smiled, eyes distant. "I'd build something that didn't just stand tall, but stood for something. A place for people like me to start again." Eleanor tilted her head. "Like a foundation?" "Yes," Lena said softly. "But not one that just gives money, one that gives purpose. Work, dignity, faith. People don't need pity, Miss Hayes. They need a chance to belong." Eleanor's throat tightened again. It was the first time in years someone had spoken about building something not for profit, but for people. When Lena left, the office felt different, lighter somehow. Eleanor stood by the window, looking down at the streets below. For years, she had built towers that reached the sky but never touched hearts. And now, one woman covered in dust had lit a spark inside her, a spark she couldn't ignore. That night, Eleanor opened her laptop and typed something new into her notes folder. Project Graceworks. Concept. A foundation that rebuilds lives through faith and work. Director, El Haddad. She stared at the words for a long time, smiling faintly. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about returns or timelines. She was thinking about purpose. It had been 2 weeks since the lunch. 2 weeks since Lena's words had started living rent-free inside Eleanor Hayes' mind. Every morning, before checking her emails or returning calls, Eleanor found herself opening the same note on her laptop. Project Graceworks. It wasn't even real yet, just an idea. But it was the first idea that didn't feel cold. Her assistant, Jordan, noticed the change immediately. "You've been..." "Smiling," he said one morning, cautiously. "That's either terrifying or promising," Eleanor smirked. "Don't get used to it." But when he left, her eyes softened again. Something was changing, and she wasn't sure she wanted it to stop. That Friday, Eleanor drove out to the construction site again, this time carrying a thermos of lemonade and 2 sandwiches. She felt oddly nervous, like she was visiting a friend rather than an employee. She found Lena near the scaffolding, helping a new worker mix plaster. "You'll burn yourself out if you keep doing everyone else's job," Eleanor said, holding out the thermos. Lena smiled, wiping her hands. "You brought lemonade?" "Don't make it weird," Eleanor said with a playful tone she didn't recognize in herself. They sat on a concrete ledge, sharing lunch in the shade of an unfinished wall. For a while, they talked about nothing, the heat, the work, the noise. Then Eleanor said, "You know, I can't stop thinking about what you said, about rebuilding lives." Lena looked up. "You mean the foundation idea?" "Yes, I think I want to do it. Fund it, build it, make it real." Lena blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "You're serious?" Eleanor nodded. "I've spent my life building towers for people who already have everything. Maybe it's time to build something that matters." Lena smiled slowly, a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "That's incredible. But Miss Hayes..." "Eleanor," she interrupted softly. "Call me Eleanor." Lena hesitated, then nodded. "Eleanor, it's not about money. You know that, right? It's about heart and faith." Eleanor met her gaze. "Then teach me." That same day, as they left the site, a commotion stirred near the front gate. A man in a wrinkled shirt was arguing with security. His voice cracked with frustration. Eleanor stopped. It took her a moment to recognize him. Tom Grady, the manager she had fired. His face looked different now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by exhaustion. He looked smaller somehow. "Please," Tom was saying to the guard. "I just need a minute to talk to someone. I'm not here to cause trouble." Eleanor approached slowly. "Amar?" Grady? Tom turned, startled. Miss Hayes, she crossed her arms. You have a lot of nerve showing up here again. I know, he said quickly. I'm not here for a job, I just wanted to apologize. To you, and to her. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. To Lena? He nodded. I've been replaying that day in my head for weeks. I was angry, bitter, stupid. I lost my job, my reputation, and probably deserved worse. But she, his voice cracked, she forgave me. No one's ever done that. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eleanor studied him. So what do you want now? Tom swallowed hard. I don't know. Maybe a chance to be useful again. Before Eleanor could reply, Lena appeared from behind her, carrying a crate of tools. The moment Tom saw her, his shoulders sagged. Ma'am, he began, voice trembling, I'm sorry. For everything I said. Lena set the crate down gently. You already have my forgiveness. I don't deserve it, Tom said quietly. That's the point, Lena replied. None of us do. The silence that followed was heavy, but peaceful. Even Eleanor felt something loosen inside her chest. After a long pause, she said, Lena, would you mind if we gave Mr. Grady a chance? Not here, but maybe in the foundation. When it's ready. Lena turned to her, surprised. You'd trust him after what happened? I'd trust your judgment, Eleanor said softly. Tom looked between them, disbelief in his eyes. You'd really let me be part of that? Lena smiled faintly. If you're willing to build instead of break, yes. Tom wiped his eyes, nodding. Then I'll build until my hands give out. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, a cup of tea in her hands, thinking about what she had witnessed. Two people connected not by power or pride, but by forgiveness. It wasn't a corporate deal or a PR gesture. It was something far more real. Something she'd never truly understood until now. She thought of the old Bible that had belonged to her husband, the one she hadn't opened in years. It was still on the top shelf of her library. For reasons she couldn't explain, she stood, retrieved it, and opened it at random. Her eyes fell on a verse highlighted in faded ink. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. Ephesians 4:32. Eleanor traced the words with her fingertip. Then she whispered into the quiet, Okay, God. I'm listening. 3 months later, the once vague dream called Graceworks was finally becoming real. What had started as an idea scribbled in Eleanor Hayes's digital notes had turned into blueprints, signed papers, and late-night meetings filled with passion instead of profit margins. The Graceworks Foundation would be built on the old Riverside lot, a weathered stretch of land Eleanor had purchased years ago for another luxury project that never took off. Instead of condos, she was building a center for new beginnings, classrooms, workshops, dormitories, and a chapel, all designed to help refugees, recovering addicts, and anyone who'd lost their footing rebuild their lives through honest work and faith. And at the center of it all stood two people no one would have ever expected. Lena Haddad, the woman who once lifted cement under the Texas sun, and Tom Grady, the man who once screamed at her. The first time Tom stepped onto the Graceworks construction site, he looked uneasy, as if walking into church barefoot. He wore an old work shirt, freshly washed but faded, and kept his eyes down. Lena noticed him instantly and smiled. You came, he nodded. Didn't think you'd actually want me here. I don't want your guilt, she said softly. I want your hands. We've got walls to build, Tom chuckled nervously. You're something else, you know that. I get that a lot, she said, picking up a paint roller and handing him one. They worked side by side, painting the first interior wall. The air smelled of sawdust and hope. Tom wasn't the same man anymore. His voice was quieter, his movements slower, careful. He listened when she spoke. And when he made mistakes, he laughed at himself instead of blaming someone else. Eleanor watched from across the site, wearing jeans and a sun hat instead of her usual tailored suit. She'd even learned to mix cement, badly, but Lena said it was the effort that mattered. "Ma'am, you've got more grout on yourself than the wall," Tom called out teasingly. Eleanor grinned. "Call me Eleanor, or I'll make you scrub it off." The workers laughed, a sound she hadn't heard on her projects in years. But under the laughter, something deeper was growing. For Eleanor, every day on that site was a kind of therapy she didn't know she needed. The sweat, the noise, the shared purpose, it all grounded her. She wasn't the CEO anymore. She was just another builder with dusty hands and a grateful heart. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel lonely. But the path wasn't smooth. At a city council meeting 2 weeks later, one of her investors confronted her. "You're seriously diverting capital into a charity project?" He snapped. "Do you know what that'll do to our returns?" Eleanor's tone was calm, but firm. "Graceworks isn't a loss. It's an investment in people," he scoffed. "You sound like one of those Sunday TV preachers." Eleanor's gaze hardened. "If that's what it takes to do something good, then maybe I should have started preaching a long time ago." She walked out of the meeting, leaving him speechless. Later that evening, she sat in her car outside the half-built Graceworks Center, watching the sunset turn the sky gold. Lena was still working, guiding a group of volunteers, men and women from shelters, rehab centers, and refugee camps. Their laughter carried across the lot like a hymn. Eleanor whispered to herself, "This is what real success looks like." That weekend, something unexpected happened. Tom approached Eleanor as she reviewed the new foundation signage. "Miss Hayes, sorry, Eleanor. Can I talk to you for a second?" "Of course," she said, setting her clipboard down. He hesitated, eyes on the ground. "I wanted to tell you something about me before all this." She nodded slowly. "I wasn't just angry that day with Lena," he began. "I was angry at life. My wife left. My kid won't talk to me. I was drinking too much. I treated people like trash because I hated myself. And then that girl." His voice cracked. "That girl prayed for me, and I didn't know what to do with that." Eleanor's expression softened. "You did something with it now. You showed up." He shook his head. "No, you don't get it. I didn't believe in God. Still don't know if I do. But when she looked at me that day, it felt like he was looking right through her. And I think that's what scared me most." Eleanor smiled faintly. "You're not alone in that feeling." Tom looked at her curiously. "You too? Let's just say I'm learning how to believe again." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of saws and hammers echoing behind them. "Funny," Tom said finally. "I used to think strong people never needed faith. Turns out, the strongest ones do." That night, after everyone had gone home, Eleanor walked through the half-lit site alone. She stopped inside the unfinished chapel, just wooden beams and dust for now, but already peaceful somehow. She ran her hand along the rough wall, then whispered, "Thank you for sending her to me." Outside, the wind picked up softly, carrying faint laughter and the hum of distant machinery. It felt like the sound of grace being built, brick by brick. That was the turning point. From that day on, Graceworks wasn't just Eleanor's project, it was her purpose. But every story of faith faces its storm, and the storm was coming. The summer sun was merciless that morning. Houston shimmered under its weight, and the air around the Graceworks site felt heavy, like the sky itself was holding its breath. They were days away from the grand opening. The dorms were finished, the chapel had its cross, and the walls smelled of fresh paint and new hope. Eleanor walked through the halls with a rare smile, tracing her fingers across the names of donors engraved on the wall. She'd paid for most of them herself, but listed them anonymously. "This place," she murmured, almost in disbelief. "It's finally real." Lena, standing beside her in a paint-splattered shirt, smiled. "It was always real, Eleanor. You just had to believe it could exist." Tom was nearby, assembling benches with a few volunteers. His laughter filled the room. He was different now, cleaner, calmer, grounded. Every once in a while, Eleanor caught him glancing at the chapel window, like a man searching for something he finally knew existed. But grace, they would soon learn, never comes without a test. That afternoon, the clouds rolled in, dark and sudden. A summer storm barreled over the city, bringing wind that howled through scaffolding and sent dust flying. "Let's secure the equipment," Tom shouted, voice cutting through the chaos. "Everyone inside." Lena rushed to tie down a tarp that had come loose over the tool shed. Eleanor called out from the doorway, "Leave it, Lena. It's not worth it." But Lena shook her head. "The electrical tools, they'll be ruined." A crack of thunder ripped the sky. Rain poured in sheets. Tom ran toward her. "Lena, wait, let me." And then it happened. A loose beam, weakened by the wind, snapped free. It fell fast, striking the ground near the shed with a deafening crash. A wave of debris shot out, knocking Lena off balance. "Lena!" Tom screamed, sprinting forward. He pulled her out from under a collapsing frame just as Eleanor reached them. When the dust cleared, Lena was on the ground, clutching her arm, wincing in pain, but alive. Her right arm was bleeding, the bone possibly fractured. "Call an ambulance," Eleanor shouted. Tom was already dialing, rain dripping from his face. Lena's eyes fluttered open. "I'm okay," she whispered through the pain. "Please don't worry. You're not okay," Eleanor said, kneeling beside her, hands shaking. "You could have been killed." Lena's lips curved into a weak smile. "I've been through worse." Her words hit Eleanor like déjà vu, the same quiet strength, the same peace, even in pain. As the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, Eleanor grabbed her hand. "You're not going anywhere alone. I'm coming with you." Hours later, at St. Luke's Hospital, Lena lay in a small room, arm wrapped in bandages. The doctor said she'd need weeks to heal, no work, no lifting. Lena seemed more worried about missing the foundation's opening than her injury. Tom sat by her bed, uncharacteristically quiet. "You could have died out there," he said softly. She looked at him. "And you could have let me." He shook his head, eyes glassy. "After what I did to you?" "Never again." Lena smiled faintly. "You saved me, Tom. That's what grace looks like. Full circle." Tom blinked fast, fighting tears. "I used to think forgiveness was weakness. Now I think it's the only strength that lasts." Across the room, Eleanor watched them, her heart tight with something she couldn't describe. She had spent her life writing people off. Now she was watching two broken souls rebuild each other. The day of the opening arrived 2 weeks later. Lena, arm still in a sling, insisted on attending. The press was there, cameras flashing. Donors and city officials filled the courtyard, admiring the gleaming new facility. Eleanor stepped up to the podium, holding her speech, but her hands trembled. She looked at Lena in the front row, at Tom beside her, and suddenly the paper in her hand felt meaningless. She set it down. "Before I say anything," she began, voice steady but emotional, "I need to tell you a story. A few months ago, I fired a man on one of my sites for yelling at a worker, a refugee who was doing backbreaking work in the heat. That woman could have hated him for what he said. She didn't. She forgave him," the crowd murmured. "That act changed everything. It changed me." Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "I used to build skyscrapers. Now I want to build lives. This place, Graceworks, is here because one woman believed love was stronger than pride. And because one man was humble enough to be transformed by it." She turned toward Lena. "This foundation isn't mine. It's yours." Lena's eyes filled with tears. Tom bowed his head, overwhelmed. Eleanor continued, "If you ever wonder what miracles look like, they look like this. Like forgiveness that doesn't make sense. Like kindness that rewrites stories. Like hope that refuses to die. When the applause began, it wasn't polite, it was human. People stood, clapping through tears. Eleanor stepped off the podium, walked to Lena, and hugged her tightly. "You taught me how to believe again," she whispered. Lena smiled through tears. "Then don't stop. Belief is the only thing that keeps the light on." That evening, after everyone left, the three of them, Eleanor, Lena, and Tom, stood alone in the chapel. The sun was setting, turning the stained glass golden. Tom placed his hand on the back of a pew. "I don't remember the last time I prayed," he said quietly. "But I think I want to start." Lena reached out her good hand, taking his and Eleanor's. "Then let's do it together." The three bowed their heads. No thunder, no choir, no miracles of light, just silence. But in that silence, something holy stirred, a peace too deep for words. For once, none of them were defined by what they'd lost. They were defined by what they'd found. A year later, Houston's skyline shimmered with morning light, and a soft breeze rustled through the courtyard of Graceworks. The center was alive, classrooms filled with laughter, the smell of coffee drifting from the cafeteria, and the steady rhythm of hammers from a new wing under construction. The walls that once echoed with emptiness now pulsed with hope. Children chased each other across the lawn. Men and women who had once lost everything now taught others how to start again. Carpentry, plumbing, English, budgeting, faith. The place was a living testimony that broken things could be rebuilt. At the front of it all, a small bronze plaque read, "Graceworks Foundation built on forgiveness. Sustained by faith." Founded by Eleanor Hayes and Lena Haddad, Eleanor stood near the gate, watching the scene unfold with quiet pride. She'd traded boardrooms for brick dust, and she'd never felt richer. A familiar voice called behind her. "You're early." She turned to see Lena walking toward her, arm fully healed, wearing a simple white blouse and jeans. Her hair was longer now, streaked by sun, and there was a calmness around her, the kind of peace that can't be bought, only lived. "I like seeing the sunrise hit the chapel windows," Eleanor said. "It reminds me how far we've come." Lena smiled. "Or how far we were carried." They stood in silence, watching a new group of volunteers unload supplies. Among them was Tom, laughing, directing traffic, his old roughness now softened by humility. He'd become one of the Foundation's project leads, known for his discipline and empathy. He had even begun leading mission trips overseas, teaching construction in poor villages, places he once wouldn't have set foot in. Eleanor watched him for a moment. "He's a different man," Lena nodded. "So are you," Eleanor smirked. "You make it sound like I was hopeless. You were lost," Lena said gently. "But now you're found," Eleanor chuckled softly. "You sound like my old pastor." Lena tilted her head. "Maybe it's not me talking." Eleanor looked at her friend. The woman who'd taught her that power meant nothing without compassion, and that faith could live in the dustiest corners of the earth. She swallowed hard. "You know, I never told you this, but when I met you, I didn't believe in anything. Not God, not people, not second chances. You changed that." Lena's eyes shimmered. "I didn't. He did." Eleanor smiled. "Maybe, but he used you." Later that afternoon, they gathered for the one-year celebration. The courtyard was decorated with handmade banners that read, "Thank you, Graceworks." Refugee families brought home-cooked food, kids performed songs, and Tom shared a few words about second chances, his voice steady, his story raw and real. When Lena took the microphone, the crowd fell silent. "I came to this country with nothing but faith," she said softly. "I thought I was here to survive. But God had other plans, plans that involved all of you. This place is proof that no heart is too broken to rebuild. If we forgive, if we love, if we help even one person up, the world changes." She paused, smiling at Eleanor. "And sometimes even millionaires learn to believe again." The crowd laughed gently, applauding through tears. Eleanor stepped up beside her, eyes glistening. "If you told me 2 years ago I'd be standing here quoting scripture, I'd have fired you on the spot," she said, making everyone laugh. But here's the truth. I didn't build this, she did. And in saving others, she saved me. Then, lowering her voice, she looked at Lena and whispered into the microphone, "Thank you for showing me what grace really means." As the sun dipped below the skyline, painting everything gold, Eleanor walked alone into the chapel. The cross glowed in the warm light. She sat in the front pew, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I don't deserve any of this." Behind her, a quiet voice answered, "None of us do." It was Lena. She sat beside Eleanor, their shoulders brushing. "But that's what makes it grace." Eleanor looked up at the stained glass, crimson and blue streaks catching the fading light. She exhaled slowly, tears forming, but this time they weren't tears of regret. They were peace. That night, as the last lights went out and the stars appeared over Houston, the city hummed in the distance. But on the hill where Graceworks stood, there was only stillness, the kind that settles after storms. Eleanor stepped outside, feeling the wind brush her face. She whispered to herself, from one act of forgiveness, "You built all this." A faint echo seemed to whisper back through the trees. Because forgiveness rebuilds, and for the first time in decades, Eleanor Hayes, the woman who once believed she had everything, finally understood what it meant to have enough. Fade out, the end.